Wireless networking is a lot like wired networking in that a lot of the underlying pieces to it, layer 2 MAC addresses, layer 3 IP addresses, the transport session, all that's going to be the same. The biggest difference is what is the physical medium that we're transmitting information across. Now you'll notice I have a little diagram here. So this is a wireless access point and it's connecting to a variety of different wireless devices. Now the way that this wireless access point communicates with the other wireless devices is through radio signals. So it's going to broadcast a set of electromagnetic radio signals that these devices in turn have antenna to pick up and read those. And then in turn, each of these devices also has a transmitting antenna capable of sending out an electromagnetic signal, a radio wave back to this wireless device, which is going to receive that radio signal and pass information back and forth. So it's very similar to the zeros and ones that we're sending up and down an Ethernet cable, but rather than going through a cable, we're transmitting an electromagnetic wave through the air. So that's why it's wireless, because there are no actual wires. But because of that, it complicates things a little bit. You know, we've gotten very good at wired networking, and if you recall, collision domains and the fact that we have switches which upgraded us from hubs so that we can essentially isolate each of these different devices into their own collision domain. Well, in a couple of ways, wireless has kind of been a step back. And the reason is because this wireless access point actually functions more as a capital H hub than it does as a switch. It's really a electrical repeater, or all of the devices are going to see all of the communication. Well, let's just think logically about why that is. An electromagnetic pulse or a radio wave is going to propagate from the antenna that's sending it out in all directions. So if I'm intending to send something to this laptop that's way out here, I'm going to send a wave out to this laptop. Well, that wave is going to propagate in all directions. So this laptop's going to see it, the smartphone's going to see it, the tablet's going to see it, this guy over here is going to see it. It's going to propagate in all directions. Now, this also brings up an interesting point, because if this guy is sending out a signal and everybody is hearing it, the same is true about any of these endpoints. If the tablet wants to talk and it sends out a signal, well, that signal is going to go out in all directions and it's going to reach the wireless access point. The wireless access point is going to interpret it, but so are all of the other devices. They're going to be seeing that as well. So in that way, this wireless access point is really acting more like a hub where everybody is seeing all of the traffic than it is acting like a switch where we've got different conversations going on. The other issue that creates is that collision detection becomes somewhat difficult. We know that there is a collision happening if we're receiving multiple garbled signals, but it becomes very difficult to actually detect those collisions. And so the wireless, rather than doing CSMA-CD or carrier sense multiple access collision detection, we want to do CSMA CA, collision avoidance. So carrier sense multiple access collision avoidance. Recall that the carrier sense simply means that we can sense whether or not somebody is already talking. We can sense whether there's something on the line. That makes sense because we've got a whole bunch of wireless devices, and so we can all hear each other's conversations over that wireless with our receiving antennas. Multiple access means that we all have equal rights. If nobody else is talking, we all have equal rights to start talking at any point in time. Collision avoidance, however, says we don't necessarily want to have a collision. And let me just expand on the big issue of collision detection. Let's say that this laptop over in this corner here and this laptop over here are trying to talk at the same time. Now, if they are within range of each other, in other words, if the transmissions from this laptop make it over to this one here, then collision detection would work because we would detect that collision, this guy would stay silent, and he would wait. But let's just say that this guy is at the far range of this wireless access point, and this guy is at the opposite far range of the wireless access point, which means that a signal from this laptop is not going to get close enough to this laptop for it to sense it, and vice versa. These two laptops are in what we call the hidden device problem. In other words, these two devices can't sense whether or not they're both talking. So they're both going to start talking because neither one thinks that the other is talking, and the wireless device is then going to get transmission from both of them. Now that becomes quite a bit of a problem because the wireless device can't instruct them to stop talking so that they can take their turns. So the collision avoidance essentially sets up inside the wireless access point. This laptop is going to send a signal that says, hey, I need to send something. The wireless access point is going to receive that signal, and it's going to broadcast out a, hey, everybody else, be quiet while this guy talks. So all of the devices within range of the wireless access point will then be quiet, and it gives this guy an opportunity to send information. Okay, so this guy's going to send what we call a request to send, and then this guy is going to send a clear to send. So the laptop says, hey, I want to send something. The wireless access point then says clear to send. All of these devices receive that, and they realize it's not us that gets to talk. It's just this guy. So in that way, by making all of these other devices quiet, this guy can then talk without having to worry about causing a collision. And that's the idea behind collision avoidance. So rather than waiting for a collision to happen and then dealing with it by waiting a random amount of time and then retransmitting information, collision avoidance is going to make everybody else be quiet for a certain amount of time while this device is sending information. Now, all of this creates some issues with wireless. Now, it's been kind of common in our day and age to use wireless for everything, and yet we complain about the fact that it's unreliable or that we can't always get through, or if you're gaming on wireless, there's lag induced. Well, if you think about this collision avoidance piece, it kind of makes sense as to why that exists. If you're in the middle of a game, now games are going to rely on high speed, low latency communication. It's not a lot of bandwidth, but you need that very low latency. Well, if I'm gaming on this laptop over here, and this laptop over here is trying to upload a YouTube video, and so it says, hey, wireless access point, I've got a lot to upload. Can you give me a second of time where it's just me talking? And the wireless access point says, okay, everybody else be quiet for 1 second. This guy doesn't get a lot of his video uploaded, but he gets some of it uploaded. But what happens to our game if we have to be quiet for a whole second? That induces a lot of latency. I mean, a second of latency in any kind of real-time or first-person shooter type game, that's just unacceptable. So that's why wireless is typically not used for that unless you can have multiple conversations at multiple times. So some of the newer wireless access points will put different devices on different channels in order to reduce that impact to latency of having this collision avoidance. The other issue with wireless is the larger number of devices that you have, the more time you spend waiting for your turn to talk, the more the other devices are doing request to send, getting a clear to send, and you have to be quiet while that device is then talking. So the more devices on that wireless network, the less actual throughput of information that you get. Now again, newer wireless access points are adding more antennas, being able to talk at multiple frequencies at the same time, both to increase bandwidth to a single device as well as to allow multiple conversations to take place at the same time. But again, a wired network is going to have significantly less latency and much higher throughput than even the best wireless access points today. Let's talk about wireless channels for just a moment. So here's just a crude diagram. You can find a better one online if you just search 2.4 gigahertz wireless channels. But I just wanted to illustrate real quick the different 2.4 gigahertz channels. Now, on typical wireless 2.4 gigahertz, we have 11 channels available for use in the United States. Now, 2.4 gigahertz is actually kind of a round number. Each of these channels represents about 5 megahertz difference in our 2.4 gigahertz signal. So 2.4 gigahertz all the way down here up to about 2.46 gigahertz over on the higher end. And so each of these channels represents about a 5 megahertz increase. However, when we send and receive information on one of these channels, the actual frequency of the information that's being passed back and forth is about 22 megahertz wide. So there's 22. You'll notice it covers about the 20 megahertz plus just a little bit on either side. So the result is, while each of these channels is 5 megahertz apart, we talk across multiple ones. So if we're talking on channel 6, the frequencies that we're actually using aren't just channel 6's 6's frequencies, we're actually covering channels 4 through 8. Now, why is this so important? Well, the issue is when we have multiple wireless access points that are talking at the same time, these will start to interfere. If they're all on channel 6, if they're all talking in this same frequency, that's going to cause interference with the other wireless access points. So we want to divide it up. If we don't push out the other channel far enough, let's say that we do a channel 3 and a channel 6, well, that channel 3 is going to overlap with our channel 6 frequencies. So we want to make sure that we use the proper channels so that we don't have interference. And the only 3 channels that don't interfere are 1, 6, and channel 11. Okay, they don't actually interfere with one another, as you can see here. Any other combination, we're only going to be able to get 2. We could do channels 2 and 10 or 3 and 9. But as soon as we do anything in the 2 to 10 range, we're only going to be able to get 2 non-conflicting 2.4 gigahertz signals within our 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth. So we usually want our wireless access points to be on channels 1, 6, and 11. Now there's a few rare cases, especially in home networks, where one of these other channels might make a little bit more sense. If there's other interference sources or maybe some different materials that these particular channels work better across. But in a large environment where we have multiple wireless access points that we own, we want to make sure that we're on channels 1, 6, and 11.